All right, welcome to another installment of the Language of the Prophets series. This is a little snippet for this is to help review with the construct state and construct chains, and this is primarily born out of questions from my student Yonatan. All right, so here's just a quick review about what's going on with construct. Most of you realize that with the construct state in Tanachit, what we really have is two or more words that are set together oppositionally, and usually this expresses the word of in English between those words. So, for example, Melech Yisrael, the king of Israel. Beautiful. Melech Eretz, a king of a land. Right? Sus Melech Eretz, a horse of a king of a land. Sus Melech Haaretz, the horse of the king of the land. And I won't go into all of the stuff reviewing what construct is, but that's just your crash review. And you can look at this slide if you want to maybe pause for a second if you want to read all about that. All right. The construct endings. Here's just a little chart reminding us about the construct endings. And this was taken from uh, the previous author here. I just showed it. Kutz and Josberger, Learning Basics of Biblical Hebrew, Reading for Comprehension. So you already know the singular absolute of a noun, of a masculine noun, right? The squares just represent that you'd have Hebrew letters there and there's no ending or prefix added to it, all right? That's the lexical form of the noun. To put in the plural, you know we just add im to it. To put it in the dual, we just add ayim, right? For example, yad means hand, yadayim means two hands. Yom is day, yomayim is 2 days, right? Etc. Okay. For the feminine, we add an to the end of the word, usually to make it a feminine word, right? You can make an adjective feminine this way by putting at the end. Okay? The plural is ot, and the dual is atayim, right? So we're still going to have that tav at the end, and we add ayim, right? For example, susa means a mare, a female horse. Susatayim means two mares. All right, now let's look at the construct. The construct for a singular masculine, usually you're not so lucky to have a makef, a little dash afterwards. The ending will be the same. We don't add a special ending to make it the construct, to make it of whatever, all right? And but notice here, see the little red accent mark? This is showing us that the accent has moved off from the word and it connects to the words that follow. So in ancient times, they would have pronounced the entire chain as if it was one big compound word. I'll show you more about that in a bit. So because of that accent moving away, sometimes the word will experience reductions in vowel sounds. All right. The masculine plural, instead of im, we've got this ancient a ending. So there you have it. That's a lot easier to recognize, right? Like Yonatan, you mentioned this in your questions. All right. So susei hamelech, right? The horse's steeds, right? The king's steeds or steeds of the king, right? And the plural, the dual is the same as the plural when it comes to construct. For the feminine, in standard biblical Hebrew, feminine nouns usually end in hey with an right? The hey was just a vowel letter telling us it was an sound, right? But what happens with the construct, they revert back to their pre-biblical Hebrew form. So in ancient Hebrew, that is in Hebrew before the Bible, usually feminine nouns ended in tav, okay? So there shouldn't be confusion here. When you see a feminine noun, and it's a noun that you know, like Torah, and it ends in tav, now what has happened is it's reverted back to the ancient stage, okay, that ancient spelling. This doesn't happen in other places. You're not usually going to see the ancient spelling of the word except when it's in the construct. So Susa is a female horse. Susat is a female horse of, all right? So whenever you see it in the ancient, don't get confused. If you see the ancient spelling, that's the construct. That's what's happening there. And it just so happens that if you put a suffix on a word, we first put the word into the construct, and then you put the suffix. So, my mare, my female horse, susa is a mare, but we put it in the construct, susat, and now you put the suffix yod. Susati, my mare. You see? Really what's happening is that tav in ancient times was a th, a th, susath, susath, and people, they just got tired of saying it, and so they softened it. Instead of susath, it became susa. But it survived when there was something connected to it. So that could either be another word connected, or it could be a suffix. Okay? I hope that dispels some confusion. Unfortunately, the construct plural ending is the same as the absolute ending, ot and ot, except that the accent mark moves to the next word. You see? That's where we have this little accent sign here. It moves to the next word in the chain. So you might have some vowel reductions here. So just like the masculine singular is basically the same as the construct masculine singular, except that the accent moves, so you might have some vowels reducing. The same thing is true with the feminine plural, absolute, being the same as the feminine plural construct, except there are some cases where the vowels will reduce. And just like the masculine, the dual is the same in the construct and in the absolute as the plural. So historic long vowels, this means vowels that were the vowel letters. You remember the vowel letters? Vav, He, and Yod? Historic long vowels did not reduce. They do not reduce. Okay? They do not change. So here you can see it indicated in red. So for example, sus, this is not a nikud. It's not one of the nikodot that the Masoretes invented to add to the text. It's an actual vowel letter. It's a long vowel represented by the vowel letter. In this case, we call it shurik, but it was a vav, so we do not change it. Okay. In ancient times, a wow. So let's look at an example. A lord is adon. Okay. Now, if I want to say a lord of, if I want to put it in construct, we're not going to add any suffix to it because this is a masculine singular, but the accent moves. See, there it is. It moved. It moved from adon. It was here. And it moved over here. Eretz. So a lord of a land is adon eretz. So this historically long vowel, in this case, cholam, a vav cholam, it's written with the vav and the dot on top, did not reduce. But this other vowel, comets, it did reduce. So there's a special rule that's happening here. In case you don't know it, this happens quite a lot. So this kind of comets, okay, oops, sorry. It's not showing me where the pointer is. This is a pretonic comets, meaning there's a tone syllable here, and this comets is pre-tone. It's before the tone, just before the tone. Only one syllable before the tone. Adon. Whenever you have a word with a pretonic comets and the accent, the tone moves, making it no longer a pretonic comets. Like in this case, he's a pro-pretonic, right, or anti. This is the tone syllable. Anyway, whatever. It's two syllables before now. That vocal long comets is adjusted to be a vocal schwa. In the case of adon, well, this guy, it just so happens that it is a guttural, and gutturals do not take vocal schwas. Instead, they take a composite schwa. That's why it's became a chataf patach here. Got it? So that's your hint on this word. If the text did not write makef, and you see, wait a second, adon should be with a comets, but it's not. Now you know that the word is in construct. You see? Because he's had some vowel reductions. Let's look at some more examples. Beit ish, a house of a man. Now this word beit, a lot of people, they think this is actually the normal lexical form of the word. They don't realize that the absolute form of beit is bayit. Bayit. It's patach under the beit, and then a chirik under the yod, bayit. Okay, so bayit is actually the way you say a house. So when its spelling changes to beit, you already know its construct. This is the construct form. So beit ish has to mean a house of a man. Notice it's a house of a man because the last word is indefinite. It's a man, so the whole chain must be indefinite. All right, let's look down at the next example. What if we make the last word definite, ha'ish? Now the whole chain is definite. Beit ha'ish, the house of the man. All right? The definiteness of the last word influences the entire chain. What about if the last word, the word which is in the absolute, is a name? That's a proper noun. Well, if we're saying Shemuel, that's a person who has an actual identifier, Shemuel. So he's no longer any old Ish. He's not just an Ish, a man. It's Shemuel, or he's Bob, or he's Bill, or Moshe, or whatever. So that means that word is definite. So that definiteness spreads to the entire chain. So Kol Shemuel means the voice of Shemuel. You see? The voice of Shemuel. The entire chain is either definite or indefinite. And Yonatan, I know you didn't ask about this one, but for the sake of completeness, this might be useful to you, and I'm thinking others will enjoy it as well. So let's take a second to talk about mixed definiteness. Because you might be thinking, okay, I understand how to say a house of a man and the house of the man, or the house of Shemuel, or the voice of Shemuel. But what if I want to say a house of the man? Not allowed. You cannot incorporate mixed definiteness into a construct chain. It's not allowed. Okay? So how do we do this? So concepts with mixed definiteness cannot use a construct chain to express them. Okay? Where one word is definite and another word is not. So for example, the Psalm of David, this is doable, no problem. Since both the Psalm and David are definite. David HaMelech, right? David's a name and the Psalm is the. So that you can do with the construct. You could say Mizmor David. That would mean the Psalm of David. A Psalm of David is, however, not doable. I shouldn't have written undoable. It's like, you can undo it. It's not doable. For this, we have to use another grammatic expression. We use the lamed of ownership, okay? Or the lamed of possession. Not demonic possession. Lamed. I'm lamed. No. So in this case, lamed, which usually means two or four, it actually takes on more of an Ugaritic flavor. We've learned from Ugaritic that lamed can mean of. And so that's quite apropos here. So if I want to say Mizmor le David, a psalm of David, which of course many of the psalms in Tehillim, in the book of Tehillim, are labeled this way. So it's literally saying a psalm belonging to David, like a psalm to David. Unless you understand it we've learned that Hebrew can actually express of with lamed in the same way that it often does in Ugaritic. So it could actually, if you're approaching it from that way, then it literally means a psalm of David. But I think we'll stick with the two as the way of understanding this, because so you don't get it mixed up with construct. A psalm belonging to David, right? Remember, lamed expresses ownership. If somebody asks, whose house is that? I could say, li. It's to me. It's mine. It's to me, right? This is how Hebrew expresses ownership. With a construct chain, one may not insert anything in the middle of the chain except the definite article, and that's on the last word only, or a heh-locative, right? Like direction towards the place, right? Here's an example of a common misconception. Oops. Misconception. Misconception. Malchi Tzedek does not mean my king of righteousness. People see it and think, well, Malki, that's my king. But if it's my king, then it cannot be a construct chain. It can't be my king of righteousness. Because you're not allowed, to insert anything in the middle of the construct chain. Only the last word you can add the hey or the hey making it definite or the hey locative, meaning direction towards, right? So you cannot say Malki Tzedek means my king of righteousness. It can mean my king is righteous or something like this. There's a whole, many people they say this is the yod compaginous. It's actually it's a genitive yod left from the old or archaic Hebrew, whatever. That's a whole debate about what the name actually means. But it cannot mean my king of righteousness, okay? Now, I'll just preface this with, because, some of my students are really astute, and some of them, they look in other places, and they get deep, and if I don't say this, then someone's going to come back to me and say, you lied to me. All right. There are some debatable phrases in the Bible, particularly in the Psalms and in wisdom literature. There are a few examples where some decent scholars have made the argument that something has interfered inside of a construct chain, namely a suffix, okay? I'm just going to put that out there, that those examples are, however, controversial. All right, so I'm admitting that they exist, but for you, at this stage in your Hebrew learning, you can take this to the bank. You don't insert anything in the middle of a construct chain, all right? Especially since those other cases are not accepted by all scholars, all right? As a result of this rule, Hebrew adjectives which modify nouns within a construct phrase must appear either before or after the construct chain. All right? They cannot be wedged in after the word they modify. You understand? Adjectives can be part of a construct chain if they are used in place of a noun. So if the adjective is functioning as a noun, we call that substantively, depending on your grammar or whatever grammar you're looking at. The noun is acting like a substantive. It thinks it's a noun, okay? Then it can. So for example, the noun, the adjective kadosh means holy, right? Notice kadosh, it was a comets with a pretonic. It was a pretonic comet, so it would have been a comets here, kadosh. And then when we put in a chain, it becomes kadosh Yisrael. The pretonic comets becomes a vocal schwa, like on the previous page, because it moves to Yisrael. There's only one accent in a construct chain, and that's on the last word. Kadosh Yisrael. Kadosh Yisrael. Okay? The Holy One of Israel. He has to be the, because Yisrael is definite. It's not any old country. He's not any person. He's Yisrael Avinu, Israel our father, or the land of Israel, the Holy One of Israel. But you will never see an adjective interrupt a construct chain. So in this case, it's acting as a noun, okay? So don't say, oh, Rabbi, you said blah, blah. No, it's actually a noun there. It's a noun. You could think of it as a noun derived from the adjective, but really, just it's acting as a noun there. It's not modifying a person, right? I'm not saying Ish Kadosh Israel, a man, a holy man of Israel. You cannot say it that way. The way that you would say a holy man of Israel, you'd say Ish Israel Hakadosh. Like this. All right, so that's what I just told you, but it looks like I typed it nicer with the hey there for the hey locative. Okay. All right, so I did the Malchi Tzedek much better in this slide. I forgot I did that. I didn't delete the other one. So the yod there, right? That's probably not saying my king. It's probably the yod compaginous. Yeah, that was a nicer slide, wasn't it? Adjectives must follow their construct chains. Okay. Again, they could come before, but then that's only for special emphasis. Remember, if you move the word order of things in Tanachit, then it means that you're usually expressing some kind of emphasis. So the usual model is noun followed by adjective, right? So we're sticking with usual for now. We don't need to complicate things. So any adjective following a construct chain, listen carefully, may be modifying any word in the chain. Yikes. Yeah. So you can actually end up with some ambiguity there. So for example, B'nai David HaTzadik the sons of righteous David, right? Or Bnei David Hatzadikim, the righteous sons of David. So neither of these are ambiguous. Because look, Bnei, even though it's in the construct, notice I had to say Hatzadik. The adjective has to agree in definiteness, right? But Tzaddik is singular. See, so you can have clues to figure out which word it's modifying if there's differences in plurality. So Bnei David Hatzadik, it can only be, we're talking about David is righteous, right? Because sons is plural, Bnei. So the sons of righteous David. Or you could say the sons of David the righteous, right? Or whatever. So I prefer to say it this way, righteous David, because then you're not going to get confused thinking, wait, is this part of the construct? And no. Our construct chain is just Bnei David. The adjective is Hatzadik. Right, let's look at the next example. Bnei David Hatzadikim. Okay, again, it's definite, ha, because it's a definite construct chain, right? The status of the chain is definite. So this has to be definite as well. So ha. They both have ha for the same reason. But in this case, tzadikim, the adjective is agreeing in number with the noun it modifies like it must. So that must be Bnei. So the righteous sons of David. You see? Hatzadikim must be modifying Bnei, not David, because David, there's only one David HaMelech, and this is not plural. I'll let you chew on that for a moment. I left the mixed definiteness up there, but we're not talking mixed definiteness anymore. Just ignore that. All right. So let's look at this. Melech haaretz gadol. All right. So we know that this is a predicate sentence, right? That is the adjective. We're going to have is in there somewhere. How do I know that? Just by looking at it. Melech haaretz. That's our construct chain. What does that mean? The king of the land, right? The last word, haaretz, is definite. It's got a ha on it. It's not any old land. It's haaretz, which, by the way, is also slang for Israel, right? So Israelis might ask one another, oh, how long has it been since you've been in the land, right? The land means Israel. The Aussies, they have to say the land down under. We can just say the land. It's so special. It's so chosen by Hashem. It's Hamakom Asher Yivchar Shemo. It's the place in which He will choose to put His name. It says in the Torah, which He actually did. So that's haaretz. It's just the land. So if you ever just see haaretz by itself, that means the land of Israel. All right. So melech haaretz, it has to be the king of the land, right? Now look, our adjective in red, it doesn't agree in definiteness, right? It just says gadol. It should say hagadol if it's modifying king here, okay? And it can't be hagadol modifying eretz because eretz is almost always feminine. There are a few times where it's masculine, but in the Nach, later in the prophets, but in the Torah it's always feminine. So melech haaretz, this means it must be a predicate sentence. There must be is here. So it means, remember, you think like Yoda, great is the king of the land. Yes, right? So melech haaretz gadol. The normal order would be gadol coming first, because if you're going to express a predicate nominative, you're going to use the adjective in this way. Usually we do the Yoda thing. Great, right? Great is the king of the land, right? You think like Yoda. So the bottom sentence is actually the normal way it would appear. If it appears the other way, and this is just a quick review on how adjectives work, if it's this way, then there's actually some special emphasis about the king of the land, right? Like maybe the previous verse said, Mi gadol ba'aretz, who is great in the land? And then we could answer, Melech ha'aretz gadol, the king of the land is great. You see? There's some special emphasis that's happening there. All right. This next line, you're going to love it. Not. This next one is ambiguous. All right. If we say, Shem ish tov. Shem ish tov. What does that mean? It can mean any of these things. It can mean a good reputation of a man, a reputation of a good man. A reputation of a man is good. It can mean any of those things. Although, again, the usual order for this last one would be to say tov first. Good is a reputation of a man. Yes. So you say good first. So if it's the last one, it can only really be the last one if there's special emphasis on the shem ish. Okay? So you understand what's happening? Because shame is masculine and singular, and ish is masculine and singular, tov is masculine and singular, and these are all indefinite. That's why you get the ambiguity. All right. Usually, you can understand from the narrative what's happening and who you're speaking of. Most of the time, we'll be able to narrow it down, right? Like if one of these were feminine, then we would know that tov can only be modifying the masculine one, right? Okay. And when it's really difficult to tell, this is when it's nice to have the ancient versions we can look to. We can look to the Targumim in Aramaic, in Jewish Aramaic, or we can look to the Septuagint in Jewish Greek, right? And one of these ways we'll find out really what's happening here. Or you look to Midrash or something from the sages. Chazal they'll usually be commenting on it if it's a strange, ambiguous verse. All right, direct question and answer time. So these are the questions Yonatan Ben Avraham submitted to me, and so I'm going to read through your questions. In a couple of cases, I might have modified them a little bit to make them more juicy. Okay, so how do I find construct chains? I know when I see a yod like Bnei Yisrael, but it really doesn't show how to find it when reading. Okay, it's a great question, especially since we're in the text, right? We're supposed to be in the text all the time. So let's see. Here's part of my answer. Usually the words which are in the construct state contain reducible vowels. All right? Again, not if they're vowel letters, but if they're other vowels, usually they're reducible. And they will reduce. So for example, Bain becomes Ben. So Bain is a son, right? And this is the lexical form of the word, Bain. It's a long vowel, tsere. You remember your chart on vowels? If you don't remember which vowels are long, which ones are short, what vowels are half vowels, etc., then I recommend, it's late by me. I recommend that you go back and review that and memorize that. And I think I have a language snippet up on our YouTube channel about it. So Bain, a son, shortens to Ben. Segol is a short vowel. So Ben Elohim means a son of God. Okay. Actually, this is the son of God, because usually when we say Elohim, Elohim. I got myself in trouble with this example because Elohim is one of those words where context tells you if you're talking about the one true God, i.e., the Elohei Yisrael, or if you're talking about like pagan gods, make-believe gods, right, or supernatural powers or whatever, right. So if we're pagan and it's Ben Elohim, then it means a son of gods, right? Okay, or a son, a son of. You could say a son of mighty, right? A son of divine beings, since Elohim sometimes refers also to angels, angelic powers, etc., right? But if we're talking about the one true God, and we know in context it's the God of Israel, then this is the Son of God. In that case, Elohim acts definite, right? Because there's only one true God, right? There's only Elohim, or Elohim. I could have actually hinted this to you in pronunciation, right? So most of you know the rule to be respectful. When we're not praying to God, we refer to him as Elohim. And if you've ever heard Israeli music, sometimes there's pop music that will refer to God. Usually they'll say Elohim, and that means they're talking about the God, right? We're making it respectful, right? We're just separating his pronunciation out from the pronunciation of the Elohei Hagoyim, right? The make-believe gods of the nations. So Bain, or Ben Elohim, the Son of God. We change the spelling, we reduce the vowels. Not always going to happen, but a lot of times it does. Okay, so the vowel reduces sometimes, but actually, let me go back. Let me tell you one more thing. Yonatan's a bit advanced, so this is for Yonatan. Anybody else listening to this? Don't worry yet. You can cover your ears. La la la. Okay, so look. Usually, the taamim will help you as well. So you've reviewed in that book, that text that you're using, the biblical Hebrew for students of modern Hebrew, right? Since you spent your time in Ulpan and stuff. So the taamim, since you memorized the conjunctive accents and which ones are disjunctive, usually a word in the construct will have a conjunctive accent in it, telling you it's going, like for example, meracha, the one that curves like this, right? Meracha, right? He tells you that he's part of the next word, and so if it's in the construct, that's a little hint that you can have. It'll usually have a conjunctive accent. Although honestly, I hardly ever have to look for that, because usually the context is flowing and you can tell. You're going to tell. It's going to be very natural when a word is in the construct. All right, so follow up. Okay, so the vowel reduces sometimes, but why? Why did this actually happen? It seems weird. Fair question. Words in a construct chain were originally read as if they were compound words in English. For example, you can take an English word house, and you can take another English word boat, and you can create a new word out of that. In English, we call that a compound word, right? Or compound noun. Houseboat. That's an actual word. You can look it up in the dictionary. A boat in which someone might live, or it's got a bed inside of it or something, right? Many pontoon boats in the south are this way. It's a houseboat, right? And there are boats that people live on, right? They're houseboats. Okay, so this is what was happening in ancient times with words that are in the construct state. Even it's crazy because in Ivrit Chadashah in modern Hebrew, nobody will pronounce it this way. Each word still gets its own accent, right? And even for myself, who was a Baal Koreh, when I would be reading from the Torah scroll, we also usually do not. We usually give each word its own accent. But the reason for the shifting of the vowels and the reason for the changes in pronunciation, all this stuff, was because in ancient times, no matter how long the construct chain was, it was treated like a single compound word. And so because of that, you get your reductions in vowel sounds. Again, we're learning, for the most part, Sephardic pronunciation, right? So for the sake of Kalal Yisrael, we're not doing the ancient pronunciations. But if you do the ancient pronunciations, and you might want to ask Isa about this over in the biblical Aramaic chat area, Yonatan, if you want to follow up more. But the ancient pronunciation of comets was different than that of patach, right? For example, in Syriac, we read the comets as o, an o sound, usually, right? The late Aramaic, it's always o, right? And so, and Ashkenazi Jews also do this. In Ashkenazi Hebrew, when we read a comets, it's always o, but which is different than patach, ah. So at least you have some distinction. Since we're doing the Sephardic pronunciation, i.e., the Israeli pronunciation, for the most part, you're not going to notice those things. But in ancient times, you would notice it. And so the word is read all as one compound word, and those longer vowels are being reduced to shorter vowel sounds. It's unfortunate that the long comets ah we still pronounce the same as the short patach ah, when really they were different. And then the even shorter chata patach ah, right? So we're pronouncing them all the same, and I think that's adding to your confusion. I think you'd almost pick up on it. You'd feel it as being more natural. If, for example, we're going ah, 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 right? I think it'd be much more logical intuitively. But because we are kind of bastardizing the pronunciation the way Israelis do of the classical language, it adds to the confusion that you're having. So it's a great question. I hope the answer helps clear things up a bit. So we don't say it with a space in it in ancient times. You read it real quickly. You read it real fast with only one accent. So, for example, if we did this in English, it wouldn't be houseboat, it'd be houseboat. If we did it the way that things were in classical Hebrew. Only the last word in the chain. Even if there's 5 words in the chain, only the last one gets the full accent sound. So everything else is getting reduced wherever possible. And so, of course, Bain became Ben Elohim, right? Even though we will still say Ben Elohim, that's really incorrect. Even the Baalei Koreh, right? The Torah readers in synagogues, oftentimes they're not getting it right. We're not doing it the ancient way, rather. If we say that that's what's right, right? We're following a certain tradition. It's just that the tradition is newer than the way things were done in ancient times. And so you lose the reason for the grammar being what it is, which is probably why you have your question. So Bain, in this phrase, would have been Ben Elohim, Ben Elohim, Ben Elohim. You see, it's like one word. It's compound. Houseboat, houseboat. We don't say houseboat when we're speaking English. We say houseboat. Ben Elohim, Ben Elohim. See, there's no accent here anymore. It's read as if it's one word. Hence the reduction. That's why the vowel reduces. Long vowel tseri became short vowel segol. So again, if you haven't learned the columns, which one's long, which one's short, for the E class, I class, whatever, go out there and look in, I've got in the language snippets a little YouTube video about this, by vowels according to their classification, E class, A class, I class, etc. So here's some examples taken from the basics of biblical Hebrew text of vowel reductions and their effect on other vowel signs, okay? So let's look here. All right. So how do you say blessing in Hebrew? Well, it's a bracha, right? It's a bracha, all right? Now look at this. This is tricky here. Maybe I'll mark it up with a pen. Oh, we'll highlight it. Okay. So in berachot, blessings, the accent is on this last syllable, isn't it? Chot. Used to be chot, but chot. Okay? I yellowized it. That's where the accent is. Accent was right here. Okay? But that's in the absolute. Now what if I want to say blessings of? Okay? Here's where it gets a bit tricky. Blessings of, the accent has moved to the last word, right? Like houseboat, right? Houseboat. Oops. So blessings of. Okay. So what happens is the accent is over here somewhere, assuming that the absolute word is just the next word. It might even be further away, right? It's moved. It's no longer here on the chot. So what happens is this comets here was a pre-tonic comets. Right? It's a comets before the tone syllable, right? And what happens with pre-tonic comets is when the tone moves elsewhere, when he moves out of town, right? Like over here, it's moved. It's over here now, right? You move to the next word. This syllable, which was pre-tonic, which was tonic, is now pre-tonic, which means this is now pro-pre-tonic. So this previously was a vocal comets. It reduces to a vocal schwa. That's the rule for pre-tonic comets. If you want to look that guy up. Okay. So, but now we have another problem. If this became a schwa, what was underneath the word, the bait for blessing? Be, brachot, blessings. Now we're violating a rule. You can't start a word with two schwas in a row. Never, 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 never. Never, 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 never. Not allowed. Okay? So if this comets became a schwa, now we have two schwas in a row. We have this one and the one that used to be here. So what happens? Compensatory lengthening. Wherever possible, two schwas in a row, like you've learned this with the inseparable preposition, will lengthen to the short vowel, chirik. Boop. Okay? You have some other rules that can happen sometimes. If the word begin with a yod, like Yerushalayim, then the yod will lose its consonantal properties and it's just Birushalayim, right? So there's other things where things happen with an aleph, etc. Aleph can kies, but for the most part, you'll be okay recognizing this one, okay? All right, let's take another example. Words, devarim. Now this is already interesting because the word in the singular is davar, but the va makes the first comets vocal comets, pretonic comets. So when we put the plural on, the accent moves to the rim, and that first comets became a schwa, devarim. All right. So now we actually have the accent on the last syllable, as we would expect, rim, right? Which means this comets is a pretonic comets. Again, we've got that issue with the pretonic comets. I'll just circle him. Oh, sorry, it's hard to see where the pointer is. That's a big circle. All right, so he's before the tone syllable. So now if I'm going to put this guy into the construct, where are you? Where are you? Oh, he's over there. Ah, I gotta draw so I can find it. The accent is going to move. So that pre-tonic comets shortens to a schwa. And again, we got the same problem with the hirik in front of him. So you can't have two hiriks in a row at the beginning of the word. So then we just lengthen him to hirik. I'm pardon, you can't have two schwas in a row. I don't know if I said two hiriks in a row. I was trying to change colors and I don't multitask so well. Right? So same as the example above. So divrei. So if I just see divrei, when you first see it, you might work through these rules, right? But after a while, you'll just recognize, okay, that's construct, right? Divrei, words of, right? Divrei Hashem, the words of the Lord, right? Okay. Tsevaot. In this case, another pretonic comets. I'm not going to circle them because it's too hard for me to see where the pointer is. That became the vocal schwa. Again, you got the double lengthening because the two schwas in a row to chirik. Tzivot. Tzivot. So it's true that you cannot tell that last. You can't tell if you just look at the ending, right? Is this ot? Is it feminine construct or is it feminine absolute? You can't tell, right? But the other vowels usually will betray what's happening. Ah, there's a chirik there, and I know it's tsevaot because the Lord of Hosts, right, ends in tsevaot. So you should know this word. So now here it's tzivot. That should signal you in, clue you in, being a language detective that something weird is happening. In this case, it's construct. So even though the ending didn't give it away, those little vowel reductions did. And again, why did it happen? Because if it's The armies of Israel, Tzivaot Yisrael. It wouldn't have been read that way. It would have been read Tzivot Yisrael in ancient times. Tzivot Yisrael, like houseboat. It's one word. Okay? Even though, like I said, it becomes confusing now because we don't read it that way anymore. But the text has survived and maintained the ancient pronunciation. Baruch Hashem, the Masoretes over 1,000 years ago, with our wonderful Jewish tradition, which preserved the text and how to read the text, and which means we preserve what words mean. Those Masoretes, they also preserve the ancient way that construct worked, that you read it as one word. Yonatan writes, I understand that feminine words like Torah changed to Torat, meaning law of. I remember you sharing that Torat was the ancient way of saying law, pre-biblical. So how can I tell when it's not in a construct state? Well, simply put, when it's not in a construct state, it's going to be Torah. You're not going to see that ancient ending, Torat. It's not going to show up. You don't really see those ancient endings. There are a few very, very, very rare cases where words might do this in the Psalms or something, but it's like Uber. Das ist Uber rare. Du musst nicht ausdenken. Ausdenken. It's super rare. You don't have to think about it, okay? When you get there, we'll get there. We'll deal with it. And usually by the time you're wrestling with Tehillim or Eov or one of these other very, very, very old works, then you're fighting with every word anyway. So you can do the research. So a better answer. Okay, so it's true that Torah was the ancient way to say this word, but in SBH, that's Standard Biblical Hebrew, and also in LBH, Late Biblical Hebrew, it was developed already to be written without the tav. Now, anytime you see the tav resurface, this indicates the construct state. So, as I mentioned briefly before, this means putting suffixes on the word also, right? My Torah, Torati, right? The tav resurfaces. It goes back to the ancient ending. It's not really that it's going back to the old form. It's just that the old form was preserved with the suffix. And so people, they instinctively knew that that's how you said my Torah, his Torah, Torato, her Torah, Torata, our Torah, Toratnu, right, etc., etc., etc. They understood that you do this, or Toratenu, and we actually end up having it in pause. It goes to that form, so people usually say that way. So, when you see the tav, it's in the construct state. Okay? When you put a suffix on a word, you have to first put it in construct. That's really kind of the secret mechanics that are happening, although most grammars don't really say that you're putting in construct, because you usually haven't learned construct yet when you learn the suffixes. So, but it's helpful to know that. I did notice something, Yonatan, in your book, The Basics of Biblical Hebrew, in the screenshot that you sent me in asking your question. There's a mistake in the book. Well, it's not, he probably doesn't mean it's a mistake. I mean, it's probably, there's something that's not true. He says that the only way to express of in biblical Hebrew is in the construct. Okay, that's not true. That's true in Torah Hebrew. It's not true in the Nach, in LBH, late biblical Hebrew. In late biblical Hebrew, there's another word you'll learn, shel. Shel means of, and this actually has survived into rabbinical Hebrew, in medieval Hebrew, rabbinical Hebrew, and into Ivrit Chadashah, modern Hebrew. Modern Hebrew is just shell all over the place. It's like the best invention since sliced bread. They just can't do without it. But in Torah Hebrew, it's true. We don't have shell. I don't think we do in the Torah. It's in later Bible stuff, but it is in Bible stuff. There is, so it's not true that construct's the only way to say of. There are other ways. Okay. All right. So here are some nice examples. Oops. Okay, I'm having a battery issue. From this text, your text, the basics of biblical Hebrew. And here he's just showing some nice changes. So we have plural masculines, Elohim becomes Elohei. I just thought it was worth putting this up, especially since you sent this to me. Banim is sons, becomes B'nai, right? So here, see the pre-tonic comments? See his spelling change? Became Shwa. Now you understand why, right? Became Shwa because the accent went elsewhere. Einayim, so this is a dual form, two eyes. But remember, the dual construct is the same as the plural construct. So, Eine, two eyes of whatever, or we usually just say eyes of. Okay. Feminine singular ending. So here, Torah, Torah becomes Torat. Now look what else happens. So we do get the hey going back to the ancient tav, but also that comments, even though he's not pre-tonic, because the accent moved away, he gets a little less stress. And look, it became a patach. Again, if you know which vowels are short vowels and which are long vowels, this will help a lot. It's unfortunate we say them the same with the Israeli Sephardic pronunciation, right? Ashkenazi, we'd say different. This is Toro, and this is Toras. You see, so you have different pronunciation with the Ashkenazi. And even with the ancient pronunciation, this be Torath, right? Torath. Torath versus Torah, right? So there's a little bit difference there. But the way we're learning it, for the sake of Klal Yisrael, you won't notice a difference between patach and comments. Long comments, rather. Okay? Malka, queen. Malkat, right? Queen of. Again, the comments is shortened to patach. And then the patach, the short vowel doesn't shorten anymore. It just stays short. Okay? Shana, a year. Shanat. Shanat Hayovel, the year of the Jubilee, right? Shanat. So, it's easy to recognize because that ancient form, the tav, right? But again, the tonic comments was shortened to a patach, and the pre-tonic comments was shortened to vocal schwa. All right? Just a few more from the examples you sent me. The feminine plural, mamlachot. So here we have mamlachot. The accent is on chot. So we have a pre-tonic comment. So what happens? Mamlachot. It became as the accent moved over here somewhere, right? Off of the word, that pre-tonic comments became a vocal schwa. And it is okay to have two schwas in a row if they're not at the beginning of the word, right? We just, one closes the previous syllable, mam, and this one's vocal, lechot. Mishpachot, so again, chot is our accent, but it's going to move, so the pre-tonic comments becomes a schwa, mishpachot. Instead of mishpachot, mishpachot. Okay? With the accent, with the syllables divided there. Banot means daughters. Again, not, accent moves, pre-tonic comments becomes schwa. And there's some stuff that happens sometimes with the tseri, but it's not so predictable, so I didn't want to get into it, okay? I'll leave that just for a sec for you to process. Processing. You ever see the Seinfeld where he's at an ATM machine? I might have told you this before, but I like it. And there's someone waiting in line behind him, and he turns around and he tells the lady, processing. Processing. Like, updating her on the status of the ATM. You know how you don't want people to feel like they're waiting on you because you're being dumb?